This whole misunderstood angle is very much, I gotta tell you, the vulnerable narcissistic person's ground game. Because the vulnerable narcissistic person, there's so much victimhood, disenfranchisement, entitlement, and shame and insecurity. The vulnerable narcissistic people basically want to say grumpy, hurtful things and get away with it because life, of course, is not fair for them. Incompetence is bad enough when it gets weaponized, right? So you have encountered this, even if you haven't actually used this term. Weaponized incompetence is the partner who says, I don't know how the new dryer works, so I didn't want to break it when I put the clothes in. So now you have to do it. It's the coworker who says, I don't have the password for that system, so I couldn't enter those files. So now you have to do it. It's the family member who says, I don't have their flight information. Nobody ever tells me anything, so I don't know when to pick them up. So now you're the one rushing out to get them. So you kind of get the idea, right? It's often this incapacity or lack of capability that a person falls back onto so they don't have to do something. And then someone's got to do the thing, right? So you may be the one having to take on the onus of the thing that they cannot do. The whole weaponized incompetence thing has a passive-aggressive vibe, a sort of vulnerable narcissistic thing happening. The weaponized incompetence is where the sullen, petulant victim stuff meets entitlement, meets not taking responsibility. The kind of, I can't do it, so you do it, and it's not my fault I can't do it. So then the assumption is someone's got to do it, and often it's you. Now you may wonder what non-weaponized incompetence looks like. Well, it looks like incompetence, just plain incompetence, right? It looks like the person like, oh, I don't know how to work the dryer. Let me figure out the dryer. Could you show me how the new dryer works? Because I don't know. Or they just don't do it right and the clothes don't get dry, right? Or can I have the password so I can get those entered? Or maybe they just enter the password wrong so many times that the password locks. Weaponized incompetence is an entitled incompetence. One thing we do know about vulnerable narcissism is that many vulnerable narcissistic folks have sort of a failure to launch. They maintain fantasies about all the great things that they're going to do or be or how smart they are, but they lack the initiative to do it. They almost wait, again, there's that entitlement, for things to come to them. So why would they take initiative? And when that lack of initiated can be further substantiated by them actually not knowing something, then they run with it. Now, weaponized incompetence people are the worst people to hire for a job. You may make the mistake of thinking, well, they seem smart. But the fact is, in real life and in work life, hustle and grit are actually a bit more important than just raw intellect. I have met a lot of really, really smart, vulnerable narcissists, like really smart. But they just didn't get stuff done. They talked about getting stuff done, but they didn't do the things, right? And they're smart, and you might find yourself giving them chance after chance after chance. But because weaponized incompetence people are often quite toxic, certainly entitled, if you keep them around long enough in the workplace, don't be surprised if they lawyer up, if you try to fire them on grounds of their incompetence. So when you notice the incompetent stuff, especially the weaponized incompetent stuff, watch for it early on and do not give second chances. So another example of where you might see weaponized incompetence show up is, for example, in a relationship. And you see this a lot with people who are going to have a child together. And, you know, in the whole fantasy of a child having a child with someone else, the other partner, the incompetent partner, might say, I'm going to help and I'm going to do the diapers and I'm going to wake up in the night with them and I'm going to do the this and the that. Then the time comes and they do the things badly. So the diaper is on in this half-assed way with and they're actually trying to use Scotch tape to put it on. The child's bath is a mess. The way they try to feed the kid creates a bigger mess, and the child doesn't, they put the clothes on backwards, whatever it may be. And so what ends up happening is that they make the big promise, they don't deliver on the thing. And not only do they not deliver, they do it so badly, and you have no option but to do it right. So then you have to step in, and now you're stuck because the kid exists. So you've got it, and now you find in very, very short period of time, you're going to find that you are doing the lion's share of stuff with the child for no other reason that a child is such high stakes, that you want it done right. And this person is shown that they're completely incompetent at it. Now they're off the hook, and don't be surprised when they turn around and said, well, you do everything. It's not like you ever let me do anything with the kid. So they get that passive-aggressive dig. They get that passive-aggressive dig in there. Now, narcissistic folks can also be a little bit lawyerly and procedural in how they live their lives. They may hit you with the, you didn't ask me to do that, as though they are some sort of computer or robot that has to be programmed. They often lack imagination in that way, especially if they don't really want to do the thing that needs to be done. And they almost enjoy the argument and finding the loophole. And they certainly don't feel the need to show that hustle and grit. Again, hustle and grit are typically something we witness in people who are not entitled. Now listen, some grandiose narcissistic folks can pull off hustle for just long enough to impress someone in a work setting that they admire, but forget about it with the vulnerable narcissistic folks. Hustle and grit are never really going to be their strong suit. Now, this weaponized incompetence, when it runs into an empathic person, can result in you making excuses, and it has a sort of gaslighting feel. You may think things like, oh, I guess I didn't show them how to run the new dryer, or they're right, I didn't give them the password. And then you can fall into their whole sort of irresponsible schema. Instead of thinking, why can't this grown-ass person step the hell up and figure it out? The weaponized incompetence people are definitely not people you would want to be on a deserted island with. They would hit you things like, sorry, I don't know how to break a coconut. Nobody showed me. You're going to be breaking all the coconuts on that island. This weaponized incompetence phenomenon happens so much, and we are often tempted to write it off to lazy or annoying, but it's more than that. It is toxic. And in the workplace, it can mean that they do nothing or very little, and everyone else is left holding the bag. In a family, it may mean that a few people do the lion's share of chores and arrangements and stuff. And in a relationship, it means that you are nowhere near an equitable distribution of things like household responsibilities and chores. Don't get dazzled by the narcissistic people's big talk. Talk is worth nothing. Pay attention if people actually do the thing, whatever it is, because those people are the keepers. I have to tell you, as someone who's been a teacher and all kinds of things for a long time, hustle and grit are becoming more and more rare in a world that is more and more tinged by entitlement. So on the flip side, when you do find those gritty folks, hold on to them for dear life, because there's a lot more people out there who are capable of weaponized incompetence. So let's talk a little bit about the whole victim-martyr vibe of narcissistic people and the reactions that can pull out for us. So narcissistic people are eternal victims. While this is much more pronounced in the vulnerable narcissistic style, it's pretty universal. There's a lot of them, when things don't go their way, it's a lot of woe is me, nothing's ever fair to me, my life is uniquely unfair. A part of the framework of narcissism in the DSM captures this by focusing on envy, that narcissistic people envy other people, which really is a manifestation of the whole victim thing. They have more than me, they have better than me, why can't I have what they have? And when you mix that all together with entitlement, you get the sense of, I am owed what they have, I deserve what they have, I should have what they have. This victim-y part of narcissism is a central pillar of the vulnerable formulation of narcissism. This is the type of narcissism that is more sullen, resentful, broodingly angry, aggrieved, passive-aggressive. In fact, many people don't even clock it as narcissism because people who are more vulnerably narcissistic also look more socially anxious. They may look mildly depressed, irritable, somewhat hostile, things that make us believe that something else is going on, and it often is. But vulnerable narcissistic folks, like I said, lack that slick vibe of the grandiose narcissistic person or the scary menace of the malignant narcissistic person. However, the type of narcissism doesn't matter. If a narcissistic person believes they are not getting theirs, they will almost immediately fall into victim mode. But this is different than another mode we witness narcissistic people often falling into, and that is the martyr mode. The martyr mode is the look how I suffer, look how much I gave up, look what I'm willing to give up mode that the narcissistic person often uses to manipulate other people or to garner validation. So let's look at a few ways that this can show up. I'm going to give you direct examples of things that people have said. I left my granddaughter's birthday party early to pick you up at the airport because I didn't want you to have to go through the rigors of having to take a cab. I always have to take a cab because I hate inconveniencing people and I know how difficult it is. Another example would be, I gave up my life and career so you could have an education and a more comfortable life than me. Another would be, me and the administrative team have decided that we aren't getting new computers and better software to run the business, so you all could get raises. Or it could be, I never asked for anything from you except these simple little holiday traditions that I love. Another example would be, I can see that you expect me to give up my vacation this year to help you with your baby. I know as I thought about this, as I was coming up with examples, I'll be very, very open. I cringed a bit because I'm like, I've kind of done some of these martyry things, many of us, especially when we are frustrated. And now I'm actually just pretty ashamed. But I've got myself, so I hope to change. And this pattern of the martyr thing, this is one of those patterns that, yeah, the narcissistic people do, but it's also a pattern that people in narcissistic relationships can sometimes fall into. Because sometimes we're so desperate to be seen in these relationships, we're trying to show them all we do for them, and they never notice us. So just keep an eye out for that because you don't want it to generalize to healthy relationships. But when it comes to this martyr thing, narcissistic people do it all the time. And it's actually a pretty skilled maneuver on their part because they get a lot of juice out of it. The martyr stuff is stuff they don't need to say. So for example, if they told the friend that they were leaving a birthday, or they told the friend ahead of time that they were leaving a birthday party early to come to the airport, the friend would have had the opportunity to say, absolutely not. No, 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 please don't. I can easily take a cab and I'll meet up with you. But after the fact, now the person being picked up at the airport is left holding the bag. They were never told about the birthday party, and now they feel even more beholden and maybe even guilty. The whole martyr thing is a way of getting what they want by playing on your empathy, compassion, and guilt, because it's more efficient than asking for it directly, too. Instead of, I love having these holiday traditions with the family, it's twisted into, I'm such a good person that asks for so little. It kind of blocks the capacity of other people to tell them no. And this martyr complex is a reason why setting boundaries in narcissistic relationships is so difficult. I know that some of you are thinking, oh, just don't fall for it. But it's really difficult not to fall for it, especially if the story tracks. For example, the parent who may ostensibly have made some sacrifices or at least had a much more difficult early life than you did, constantly reminding you of that, it wears on you. And sometimes you give in, not because you aren't good at boundaries, but because you do kind of feel bad and you just can't listen to it anymore. Martyrs do not make a good dinner party guest. They get very dull very quickly. This martyr thing also pushes you into doing their dirty work. For example, look at that vacation one I shared with you. I guess you want me to give up my vacation this year so I can come out and help you with the baby or the dog or whatever, fill in the blank. No, you don't want them to give up their vacation. Yes, perhaps they had agreed to help with a family issue, so now the setup is that in order to get them to help you with the baby or dog or whatever it is they're helping you with, you become the bad one. And now instead of asking for help, this has now turned into you're the one who's asking them to give up a vacation. It's all very Darvo-ish, and it is very uncomfortable. The martyr move is very, very central to the communal and the self-righteous narcissistic people's playbooks. The communal narcissist, the narcissist who gets their validation by being perceived as some sort of grand savior, actually maintains an identity of being, again, this sort of living saint who gives so much, who does so much, and sacrifices. But my reading on saints was that when they were alive, they didn't actually draw a lot of attention to themselves. But for the, and then they have to be dead too, right? But for the communal narcissist, being lauded and praised for their sacrifices and being held on a pedestal for being so giving is the win for them. Oh, he gives up so much for his family. Oh, she gave up everything to make sure her kids could have better lives. Please notice the sacrifice I made. And they will also use that framing of themselves as sacrificial human beings as a way to get things done. For the self-righteous narcissistic folks, it is often a focus on how carefully they live their lives. Oh, I never gave in to the things in life that mattered to me. I held back on the things I wanted to be sure the people around me could pursue their dreams. Or I hold back on things I would like to get myself to save money so I can give back to others. As you can imagine, asking someone who's saying that kind of stuff, asking them to borrow $1 is not going to be worth it. It's important to understand the distinction because most of us are more clear on the woe is me victimized element of narcissism, but this martyr part often gets missed. Remember that narcissistic people often hold a conception of themselves as great people, genuinely believing that they're warm, empathic, generous, and they also do see themselves as being victims or misunderstood. But this martyr piece can very much contribute to long-term trauma bonds for people in relationships with them. The victim part may play on our pity. We pity a person for whom life isn't going the way that they want, or who has failed to launch, or they keep selling the story that everybody's out to get them. The interesting thing about pity is that, yes, it may keep us stuck in a relationship, doing things, trying to make things right for the other person, trying to rescue them. It also does kind of even things out a little. If we pity someone, we do see them as less powerful. This martyr thing is different because it plays on guilt. And guilt can really fortify the trauma bond. The martyr piece, the sense that we owe someone, or now we owe someone because they made a sacrifice that benefited us, or that they've given so much up for us, or just has given stuff up. That almost puts or keeps them on a higher plane. So the asymmetry in the relationship, which is classical of narcissistic relationships, is maintained. But at the same time, it plays on an intense sense of guilt and an eternal sense of beholdenness. Many people with narcissistic parents will say this martyr complex is what kept the trauma bond in place for a very long time. And this can also happen in friendships or other long-term relationships. In healthy relationships, we maintain constant awareness of the other, including the sacrifices they have made, and we behave in accordance with that. We compromise as well, we offer gratitude, but it's a two-way street, and they see us too. And in a healthy relationships, the sacrifice someone else made are not weaponized by that person as a way to mobilize people to do something. The entitlement, none of that, you owe me. Keep an eye out for that martyr complex. In many cases, it may not even register because it is so baked in to the communication patterns in this relationship. But it also keeps the guilt baked in. And that guilt can be something that continues to be a prevailing theme, or at least avoiding the sense of guilt, that motivates you in all of your relationships. Have you ever had the experience with a narcissistic person and they so believe they're misunderstood? Have you ever believed in a narcissistic relationship that if I could just read their mind, everything in this relationship would be fine? This belief is a signature element of the narcissistic relationship. I mean, listen, it's not only there. I mean, in any relationship, even with a kid, we may wonder this. Like, if I could read their mind, right? If I knew they were having a bad day, maybe I wouldn't have asked them something that was kind of small and irritating, right? We go through that. But this idea, I wish I could read their mind and everything would be fine, is a unique feature of the narcissistic relationship. And if you could read their mind, then I guess you could calibrate your expectations. And then maybe the times you need to walk on the eggshells might feel a little more predictable. And you might even be able to do the right thing every single time. So you didn't always feel like things were blowing up, right? Because you could read their mind. You'd know exactly what to do or say. But you can't read minds. None of us can read minds. Though I have to say, I've talked to many survivors where they got awfully close to being able to read the narcissistic person's mind. You actually do start to be able to pick up really subtle things like the frequency of the jingle of the keys in the door that will tell you their mood, or the pace of their walking, or the subtlest expression on their face. The hypervigilance that evolves in people in these relationships, and any of you in these relationships, can result in you actually really, to a scary degree, learning to anticipate what you can do to keep things more regulated in the relationship, because the narcissistic person can't regulate. But one thing that makes this very difficult is that narcissistic people almost always feel as though they, only them, that they are misunderstood. Now, this sense of narcissistic being misunderstoodness can show up in several ways. Number one, leave it to the media. Of course, it's always the media, right? And the narcissistic people themselves. They're better at social media than any of us, right? And they're better at getting the word out about how misunderstood they are, how much they suffer more than anyone else, and how people are being so mean to them by calling out their behavior as a problem, and that we need to do more to understand their experience, with no reflection on the harm that they're doing to other people because of their behavior. No, it's only that everyone misunderstands them. But I have to say, in the past year or so, all of these narcissistic influencers are getting a much bigger platform. And a lot of it is focused on how misunderstood they are. And we get to hear them talking quite openly about their shame and insecurity and what they need and what they want. So basically, many narcissistic people feel that even if they are aware that they are narcissistic, that their narcissism itself is still misunderstood. Number two, this whole misunderstood angle is very much, I gotta tell you, the vulnerable narcissistic person's ground game. Because the vulnerable narcissistic person, there's so much victimhood, disenfranchisement, entitlement, and shame and insecurity. The vulnerable narcissistic people basically want to say grumpy, hurtful things and get away with it because life, of course, is not fair for them. It's for this reason that relationships with vulnerable narcissistic folks may sometimes be the most difficult to leave, not only physically, but also psychologically. You feel this really icky mix of pity, guilt, shame, even compassion, because sometimes you see their genuine vulnerability seem to shine through. And at those times, they kind of seem like a sad little kid. And then at other times, they will deliver a hurtful zinger or complain at being asked to do the smallest thing because they're just too special to take the trash out. And when you attempt to communicate with them, a lot of their stance is that they're just so misunderstood. Number 3, and here's where we talk about the hypocrisy, which is such a signature of narcissistic relationships. The double standard of the narcissistic relationship is where a lot of the frustration comes from for people in these relationships. One set of rules for you, one set of rules for them. They expect you to have empathy for them. There is no expectation that they have to have empathy for you. It's here that most people waste their breath and keep engaging with the narcissistic person. You're explaining, you're trying to convince them, you're trying to prove your case. And ultimately, though, they're not listening, first of all. Or the narcissistic person will say, oh, you don't get it. You don't get me. I'm just sharing an opinion and have a healthy debate with you. But you're so dramatic and blah, 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 right? There is this aggrieved sense in all narcissistic people, especially because remember, narcissistic people aren't delusional. They know when they're doing something bad. The thing is when they know they're doing something bad and they get caught. It's the getting caught where the narcissistic people are more likely to do the whole nobody understands me thing. They will happily go about their merry way doing hurtful, betraying things and not stop doing those things until they're caught. And then they're quite good at doing the impression management and optics work to make themselves look good again, as well as the victim stuff. But when they are caught, a lot of it is going to be, you don't get it, you don't get me, you don't know how I am or who I am, you view me as a monster, you don't get what just happened because you don't understand them. Number 4, and the real mind F, is that sometimes the narcissistic twist is that in the midst of them doing an entitled, self-serving thing, they will actually claim that this really messed up thing that they're doing is for your own good or for other people's own good. And that people are misunderstanding them and thinking that they're doing something bad when in fact they're doing something good. So a challenge in narcissism is something that we call poor self-reflective capacity. A fancy way of saying that the narcissistic person doesn't really understand their why, or they don't have good, quick access to their why they would behave the way they do. Because to do it, it gets at shame, right? And that gets complicated. It gets at the deep-seated stuff in them, the sense of inadequacy, their need to show up as as perfect and special, because that pushes away that sense of insecurity. They tend to overcompensate through grandiosity. And all of this is pretty exhausting for everyone around it and for the narcissistic people themselves. So other people and other people's needs evoke shame and more inadequacy in the narcissistic person. So mix all this together and a narcissistic person cannot provide a thoughtful why. And instead what we get is blame shifting. They didn't do something bad. It's your fault. Or narcissistic people will pivot to either believing their behavior was misunderstood, or their intention was misunderstood, or their character is misunderstood, or that they are misunderstood, and then quickly spin into being a victim. The grand irony is that the narcissistic person has very little interest in understanding you, unless they really, really are trying to shake you down. But they may ask you why you do something. However, if you were to honestly answer why you did something, their pushback would either be contemptuous or gaslighting. They might even say things like, "Ugh, I knew there was something wrong with you." So that really leaves us with the question, what do you do? If you understand narcissism, you understand why the narcissistic person does what they do. But you can't share that understanding with them, because if you really shared what is why they do what they do, they would become enraged because it would paint them as vulnerable or insecure. So understanding isn't enough for you and for them. When they say that they feel misunderstood, if you put on your narcissism translation goggles, what they are saying is they feel they're being unfairly treated. It's all that victim stuff again. And of course, that takes us back to things like don't go deep, right? Don't defend, don't engage, don't explain. Don't explain is a big one here. Because if you try to explain their behavior to them, the narcissistic person's behavior to them, they are merely going to pivot right back to saying that they're misunderstood. The hardest part of being in a narcissistic relationship is to not feel like we are losing our empathy just by being in it. But keep in mind, being empathic doesn't mean that you have to buy someone else's BS. Because the narcissistic person is in fact struggling and does feel insecure and is overcompensating, and at the same time, their behavior is unacceptable. All of these things can be true at the same time. Listen, having empathy for them having to live in this constant state of internal shame and vulnerability doesn't mean that you keep making excuses, nor does it mean that you keep trying harder and harder to understand them more. You already get it. There's nothing to be done. Empathizing and enabling are not the same thing. You can empathize and also disengage. You can look at a person, most people who behave narcissistically, they have an internal hollowness to them. Now, listen, it's on them. They can do the work. You're doing the work. And it's not on you to do the work for both of you. These narcissistic antagonistic dynamics can also leave you feeling, this idea that they're misunderstood can leave you feeling like you're a bad person because they keep telling you that you misunderstand them and you're not doing enough to understand them. The whiny cry of the narcissist, believing that they are always misunderstood, is one of their most common victimized battle cries. Trust me, you do understand it. But there's not much you can do with that understanding than to realize it sucks to be them. Kind of sucks to be you because you're in this relationship. You can't fix it. Their behavior is not okay. And it is okay to focus on healing and taking care of yourself instead of trying to make a career out of trying to show them that you do understand them. You do. You ain't gonna ever prove it to them. There is no way to do that except to just let them keep engaging in their spoiled child antics for perpetuity. Because they truly, genuinely, almost delusionally believe that they are misunderstood. And no amount of you trying to understand the narcissistic person or people in your life will work. Because ultimately, for them to be understood, well, what that really would look like to them would mean that they always have to win, they always get their way, everyone always takes their side, they're never questioned or called out, they get something for nothing, and they have the world treat them as though they're exceptional, even if they do nothing to deserve that. And then, and only then, might they actually believe that they are understood. So I ask you, are you really up for that? Think about it. But it is the dynamic in the relationship that is pretty much at the root of all that goes wrong in these relationships, that confuses the hell out of us, that leaves us feeling not enough or downright bad. And when we engage with the narcissistic person as though they are normal, regular, or explain basic things or give feedback, all hell breaks loose. So, what do we need to do to make a narcissistic relationship work? Well, theoretically, that would simply be to carry all the shame of the relationship. Take it all on. When they project the shame onto you, don't fight back or tell them that they are wrong or say, I didn't do that. I'm not taking responsibility for that, right? And get ahead of it by holding on to the idea that you're the problem in the relationship. And when you do that, which is not good for you, sadly, the relationship will probably have far less conflict and just keep on keeping on. It might even trick you to seem like there's no problem in the relationship, except I can almost guarantee that you're going to start to feel really sick. So what does that mean for you to carry all the shame of the relationship? Frankly, once you understand how shame works in a narcissistic relationship, you actually have it all figured out. Because it is if not the essential element of understanding how these relationships work. All the stuff on the outside of these relationships that drives us nuts and pisses us off, the entitlement, the grandiosity, the need for validation, the anger when they don't get all the excessive validation, the pathological selfishness, the marginal empathy, the false empathy, the superficiality, it's all of that's protection for the narcissistic person, as well as a way for the narcissistic person to cover up a much deeper problem, which is their shame. They cannot be vulnerable with that shame. It feels like the world would end if they did. So they can't feel whole with that. It threatens their narcissistic person's entire existence. The insecurity that they're not perfect, that they're not special, that they are as ordinary as everyone else, that doesn't work for them. So the shame is a cauldron bubbling under the surface. And it is often well covered by all of the posturing and the entitlement and the grandiosity and all the rest of it. But sometimes, often actually, that shame gets pinged for the narcissistic person. Their thin gold veneer gets scratched. This may happen because the narcissistic person is criticized, or their authority is questioned, or something doesn't go their way, or someone tells them that they did something that wasn't nice, or laughs at them, or teases them, or fires them, or ends a relationship with them. Regular stuff of life. And when those things happen, a person with a narcissistic personality is then reminded that they are regular, they are ordinary, and they're not perfect and not special. And the shame then comes sort of pouring out. But it doesn't just come flowing out onto the ground. No. Like a heat-seeking missile, it arcs towards the person who is viewed as the one who activated the shame. Hell, you could literally be minding your own business and innocently correct something that they said at a dinner party, and bam, I promise you that shame is coming for you. Then you may be attacked, humiliated, reminded of your flaws, given the silent treatment, ostracized. You are shamed. In essence, their shame now becomes your problem and your burden, and frankly, your shame. Even when it's not a moment where they feel you did or didn't do something or say something, projecting their shame onto other folks is sort of narcissism 101. The narcissistic parent, for example, will allow the child to carry the burden of their projected shame. Where do you think this internalized sense of not good enough comes from? It comes from carrying the parental shame. And now, this new shame we now have, which is magnified because we're carrying theirs too, and it makes ours feel worse. To feel shame is very uncomfortable, almost intolerable for the narcissistic person. So they'll always foist it onto other people. Things like, oh, look at this team, you all suck. Or, oh, this family, my gosh, none of you would be anything without me. The narcissistic person gets to unburden themselves, and without it ever being said explicitly, in order for us to stay in the relationship, we have to carry their bag of shame. And over time, this can mean things like talking about ourselves in disparaging terms, or not putting ourselves up for opportunities, or always assuming that we are the problem. In essence, just basically holding ourselves back. Attachment to a narcissistic person means taking on the shame bag that they're willing to have you carry. And once you do that, you can continue to be close to them. It's not a great setup, but for kids, there are no other options. And if you don't understand how this works, it's an easy dynamic to get pulled into because we want to love and we want to be loved. I remember one lady telling me her story, and her telling me one day that she told her mother that she just wasn't nice and that she shouldn't tell her own daughter, so that lady's granddaughter, that she should lose weight. Her mother then launched an attack on her daughter, on the daughter who gave her the feedback, saying things to her like, well, is it really any wonder that you're divorced and never met anyone else? Well, is that what you want for your daughter? You're carrying the shame now. We need shame shields if we are ever going to give feedback to a narcissistic person. A piece of this dynamic to remember is that how other people see narcissistic people matters. They care what others think of them, and they care deeply, which is interesting. Narcissistic people don't always have great empathy for other people, but boy, do they care how they are perceived by those other people, which means that the shame is always right there under the surface. Because if they perceive that other people don't like them, instead of getting sad, the more likely response is that they will attack. So obviously I am being tongue-in-cheek when I say that this is how you make one of these relationships work, because it's really not working. If you take on the shame, which we have all done without quite knowing we were doing it, we slowly get sick, anxious, depressed, self-disparaging, we're full of dread, and we shrink and we shrink and we shrink. It's bad enough that we have to carry our own damn shame. Throwing the narcissistic persons on top of it is far too much of a burden for anyone to carry. And remember, they have way more shame than us. So we're carrying lots of heavy cargo now. And when you are able to do this well, carry on their shame, or for a long time, the relationship can actually feel like it's chugging along fine, but it's really not. You are suffering in the relationship and wonder why you feel as bad as you feel. As we grow up and recognize that attachment and love only came, and it actually meant that because we were willing to take on our parents' shit or intergenerational shit, well, that's a big eye-opener. And the grief at that point is overwhelming. So no, this is not a path forward, but it is the path that many people in narcissistic relationships take until they slowly understand what they're dealing with. And I'm hoping to make this process less slow for you, reminding you that taking on another person's shame is not love. It's subjugation. Remember that.